What he does is he releases ink into the water. He makes it real dark and murky, so you can't see. Where's the octopus? Can you find him? There he is. Who will stand for the little girl? Who will stand for the little girl who is now dead? Who will stand for the little girl who came from humble means? Who will stand for the little girl who fulfilled all of her dreams? Who will stand for Diane Macgyver? She knew betrayal, hurt, and pain.
On Sunday, September 25th, 2016, Tex McIver spent the day golfing with his wife, Diane. Afterwards, they went back to their ranch home in Putnam County, where Diane's friend Danny Joe Carter was spending the weekend with them. At the end of the day, all three headed back to Atlanta in the McIver's SUV. Danny Joe was driving because Diane and Tex had been drinking wine. Diane was in the front passenger seat and Tex was in the back seat. When they got to downtown Atlanta on the connector, they hit traffic, so they took the Edgewood exit. As they got off the road, Tex was concerned about the neighborhood they were in, so he asked Diane to hand him his gun from the console. They continued driving up Piedmont Road, and somewhere between 12th and 14th Street, the gun went off. The bullet traveled through the front passenger seat and struck Diane. She died the next day at the hospital. Tex McIver says it was an accident, but prosecutors say it's murder. This is the trial of Tex McIver. Huge day inside the courtroom. The judge allowed the jury to take a look at the SUV and get inside the SUV, the same one that Tex McIver was in when he shot and killed his wife, Diane. No cameras were allowed there, but our photographer, Jefferson, was there as the jury was watching it. Describe the scene for us.
All right, we're in a concrete sally port where they bring in prisoners.
What was the process? How did they do it?
The jurors went up one at a time. Each juror took about a minute and a half. Some jurors took as long as 2 minutes. Some got in all 4 doors. Some only got in 2 doors.
They were allowed to sit in each of the 4 seats.
Yes.
Any notable reaction from any of the jurors?
No, it just seemed like they were just looking at another car.
So now the jury clears out and then the media is allowed to examine the SUV?
Absolutely.
What struck you about what you saw inside?
Follow the dowel. Because of the placement of the armrest with the door closed, it would have been impossible for you to have the gun like this and match up with the dowel. But if you turned your hand either like this or the other way, laying it flat like this, either side, it matched up perfect.
The defense version and explanation of how that gun had to be was consistent with your own examination of the scene.
I saw it. Yeah, I saw the whole thing. Yeah, it was perfect.
What happens next if Tex McIver is found guilty? If Tex McIver is found guilty, the first thing that would happen in the courtroom is a decision about whether or not his bond gets revoked, because he's facing life in prison either with or without parole. So at that point, where does Tex McIver go? Pending his sentencing, pending his appeal. That's where the legal battle will be between the defense and the prosecution. Obviously, prosecutors will want him locked up immediately, and the defense will do whatever they can to try to keep him out until sentencing and then keep him out. On Sunday, September 25th, 2016, Tex McIver spent the day golfing with his wife, Diane. Afterwards, they went back to their ranch home in Putnam County, where Diane's friend Danny Joe Carter was spending the weekend with them. At the end of the day, all three headed back to Atlanta in the McIver's SUV. Danny Joe was driving because Diane and Tex had been drinking wine. Diane was in the front passenger seat and Tex was in the back seat. When they got to downtown Atlanta on the connector, they hit traffic, so they took the Edgewood exit. As they got off the road, Tex was concerned about the neighborhood they were in, so he asked Diane to hand him his gun from the console. They continued driving up Piedmont Road, and somewhere between 12th and 14th Street, the gun went off. The bullet traveled through the front passenger seat and struck Diane. She died the next day at the hospital. Tex McIver says it was an accident, but prosecutors say it's murder. This is the trial of Tex McIver.
Huge day inside the courtroom. The judge allowed the jury to take a look at the SUV and get inside the SUV, the same one that Tex McIver was in when he shot and killed his wife, Diane. No cameras were allowed there, but our photographer, Jefferson, was there as the jury was watching it. Describe the scene for us.
All right, we're in a concrete sally port where they bring in prisoners.
What was the process? How did they do it?
The jurors went up one at a time. Each juror took about a minute and a half. Some jurors took as long as 2 minutes. Some got in all 4 doors. Some only got in 2 doors.
They were allowed to sit in each of the 4 seats.
Yes.
Any notable reaction from any of the jurors?
No, it just seemed like they were just looking at another car.
So now the jury clears out and then the media is allowed to examine the SUV?
Absolutely.
What struck you about what you saw inside?
Follow the dowel. Because of the placement of the armrest with the door closed, it would have been impossible for you to have the gun like this and match up with the dowel. But if you turned your hand either like this or the other way, laying it flat like this, either side, it matched up perfect.
The defense version and explanation of how that gun had to be was consistent with your own examination of the scene.
I saw it. Yeah, I saw the whole thing. Yeah, it was perfect.
What happens next if Tex McIver is found guilty? If Tex McIver is found guilty, the first thing that would happen in the courtroom is a decision about whether or not his bond gets revoked, because he's facing life in prison either with or without parole. So at that point, where does Tex McIver go? Pending his sentencing, pending his appeal. That's where the legal battle will be between the defense and the prosecution. Obviously, prosecutors will want him locked up immediately, and the defense will do whatever they can to try to keep him out until sentencing and then keep him out until the appeal is heard. Both of those very unlikely. What happens next if Tex McIver is found not guilty? Game over for prosecutors. Tex McIver will walk out of that courtroom a free man and will never be able to be charged with those counts, with those allegations ever again. Jeopardy attaches. You can't try the same person twice for the same crime. Tex McIver will be free. What are the possible outcomes for Tex McIver? Well, you got to go to the indictment and take a look at all of the charges, because they can be guilty or not guilty on all of them with different sentences. Count 1, murder, guilty, life with or without the possibility of parole. If he's found not guilty, the jury can still consider involuntary manslaughter, which is 1 to 10 years. Count 2, felony murder, same sentence as malice murder, life in prison with or without the possibility of parole. Count 3, aggravated assault. That's 1 to 20 years if he's found guilty. Count 4, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. That is 5 years mandatory, running consecutively to whatever felony he's found guilty of. And count 5, witness tampering. That is 2 to 10 years in prison. So if Tex McIver is found not guilty of murder, that's just the beginning of the story.
Remember the expert from the crime lab demonstrating the weapon and pulling the trigger?
Notice the trigger.
Oops, he's demonstrating it for you on the witness stand. He accidentally pulls the trigger. He says, oops.
The auction.
Not one for sentimental value. He's prancing up and down talking about the furs for sentimental value. Speculation. There must have been a second will. Speculation. She must have been getting ready to foreclose on the $350,000. Speculation. They must have been arguing in private. If Mr. Rucker can convince you to speculate about 20 or 30 different things, none of which we've heard any evidence about, then we lose. We are going to vilify Tex McIver. He acted irrationally after his wife died. He was worried about money. He lacks social skills. He looks at another woman. He gets a massage. He's not sentimental about her jewelry and her furs. Because of all those things, by golly, you should feel comfortable finding him guilty of murder.
He wants you to believe that it was an accident. He doesn't really know that much about guns. So he told the police department, I ain't fired that gun in, woo, so long. It was just, I had it, it was just on my lap. I was handling it. And it just went off. And you know that he says to a reporter, guns are not my thing. Did y'all see all them guns I had in here on the table? And all them different revolvers that are just like the gun he used to shoot and kill his wife. Why would he lie about that? It's because he is guilty. He is guilty. Carl, who will stand for the little girl? Who will stand for the little girl who is now dead? Who will stand for the little girl who came from humble means? Who will stand for the little girl who fulfilled all of her dreams? Who will stand for Diane Macgyver? She knew betrayal, hurt, and pain. When I was a kid, there was this movie with this real famous actor. His name was Richard Gere. It was American Gigolo. Huh? He used to go out and get women to take care of him. Y'all remember that? Spoilers of the Sea. It's a story about a young man and an octopus. The octopus, when he feels threatened, what he does is he releases ink into the water. He makes it real dark and murky, so you can't see. Where's the octopus? Can you find him? There he is. Who will stand for the little girl? Who will stand for the little girl who is now dead? Who will stand for the little girl who came from humble means? Who will stand for the little girl who fulfilled all of her dreams? Who will stand for Diane Macgyver? She knew betrayal, hurt, and pain.
Good evening. What a day inside the courtroom. Welcome to Late Feed Law. I'm Vinny Politan. Great to have you aboard. Closing arguments today in the Fulton County Courthouse in the Tex McIver Murder Trial. Was it murder? Was it an accident? Was it something in between? What did you think of what the prosecution did? What did you think of what the defense did? I'm reading a ton of comments all day long. And tonight with us, I've got my legal dream team who were in the courtroom today. Latoya Hines, prosecutor. Darrell Cohen, defense attorney.
Former prosecutor.
Former prosecutor, by the way. All right, so we've got a lot to talk about. I'm taking your questions, your comments. I know everyone's watching. Sally and Cindy and Robert and Linda and Jan and Lauren, of course. We've got, who else we have? Kathy and Sherry and Betty, of course, is there, and Kathy and Paul. All right, get to your comments and questions in just a second. Let me just click out of that. Oh man, we got a lot of pop-ups here. All right, I'll get it back. There we go. There we go. Just gonna get this out of the way. 1 second. 1 second. Now I can see. All right, so we are here. And let me get to the top of the comments so I can see everything rolling down. All right, so here's the question tonight. Let's start right here. You guys were in the courtroom. Clint Rucker. What did you think of his presence, his performance, the way he argued the case at the end, the last thing that the jury heard? Because I think we got the most comments about his performance today What did you think?
So I was able to actually watch him and watch the jury watching him. And of all of the attorneys that went today, they were really, really engaged with him. They were doing this direct eye contact, and I think it was that he grabbed their attention. He, of all of the attorneys, was loud, and I know Daryl's going to probably say too loud. But
way too loud.
But he was loud, but what he did was he was emotional. I mean, he kind of gave a bit of a performance as a prosecutor who's zealously
Let me ask you this,
doing
so
the
when you
case.
say that, did it come across as a performance, or did it come across as appropriate, like legitimate, like credible?
But if you know Clint, like, he was energetic, and he was on this case. I thought that it was legitimate. I didn't think it was over the top. I'd be really honest with you if I did. I thought he did a great job of being powerful and making the jury stay with him. I mean, it had been a very long morning.
He went last,
Yeah,
right?
he went a very long morning. They didn't even get a chance to have lunch. I mean, this case went until like 2 o'clock without them having a lunch break, and he was able to still keep their attention. I mean, I got a little worried with the mason jar. Wasn't quite sure where that was going to go.
Well, this water is clear. There, you can see right through that. All right, John, what was your take on Clint Rucker, the prosecutor, today? Because he, I mean, as Latonia said, he stole the show today. He did, whether you liked it or didn't like it, he's the one everyone's talking about.
There's no question in my mind that Clint stole the show. Now, let me tell you where I was distracted. I watched his pocket square, and I don't think any juror could take his or her eyes off of Clint's pocket square. Now, having said that, I thought he was very powerful, and he put on an Oscar-winning performance. But the problem was he doesn't have the evidence. So when you talk about stretch tight and stretch, he reached to the far corners of the earth to come to the conclusions that he came to. I was not disappointed in him at all. I thought he did a great job for what he had, but it should not have happened. We never know what a jury's going to do. The evidence is not there.
Sandy says Rucker rocked.
Yeah, and you know what I love that Clint did, and watching each person, what Clint did is reminded you that Diane was more than a number. She was more than her bank account. He went with the emotion part of it. More emotion than Tex McIver's ever shown at all. I mean, as a matter of fact, the whole courtroom laughed when they talked about his lack of social skills and lack of emotion.
Let me read this to you. Claudia, Rucker was annoying. Kathy, I think the jury was just watching him sweat. And what was the temperature like in the courtroom?
Comfortable.
It was comfortable.
fine.
He was wiping his head a lot during
It's fine.
Well, yeah, he had that handkerchief. But Clint works himself up, and Clint likes to do what he did, and he's really, really great at it. But again, if you don't have the evidence, you don't have the evidence. It's not there. You can't manufacture it in closing argument, which is what he was trying to do. And I agree with Latonia. He went to the emotional part, and do you know why? He did what the defense likes to do. He didn't have the facts. I'm an ex-prosecutor. You're an ex-prosecutor. Latonia is a current prosecutor. Prosecutors go for the facts, and if emotion follows, that's great. They don't go for the emotion.
It was like role reversal today, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because, let's be honest, in most cases, the evidence is usually pretty overwhelming for guilt.
No question.
But you know what I think that ADA Kara Convery did very well at the beginning? She reminded everybody that, you know what, they don't have to prove motive. They don't have to prove intent. It's just the fact that intended to actually shoot the gun. And so I thought that was a really powerful moment to make sure that the jury understood those issues. The thing that I'm kind of worried about is I wanted them to get away from the plan being before they actually got in the car. I think that she came back a little bit and said that intent can happen very quickly, because I think that's the argument that if the jury comes back with guilty on the malice murder, they've got to believe that the intent happened very quickly when he shot that gun.
And how do you get around the fact that between the fabric facing closest to Tex and the fabric closest to Diane, there's metal? How do you get around the fact that a bullet doesn't go straight through metal? It veers off to the left or right or up or down.
It doesn't
I got it.
to,
Yes, it does. And so he would have had to have placed Diane there. He would have had to have, even if he was that good at predicting what he could do, the greatest marksman in the world would not necessarily be able to kill the person he's trying to shoot.
He also had alcohol. The thing of it is, you don't have to prove that he knew what was going to happen. Like that, you don't have to prove that the shooting was truly going to kill her, right? You've got to prove that that was his intent. The fact that, you understand what I'm saying? Like it.
I couldn't disagree with you more, Latonia. He didn't have the intent. The evidence is just not there. They were like lovers. Everybody said they were like lovers. Everyone in the car said they thought it was an accident. Diane thought it was an accident. When Danny Joe heard Diane say, Tex just shot me, Danny Joe thought it was a joke. I mean, the evidence is just not there for murder. It just isn't. And you can't make evidence that isn't there. Again, a jury can do as they please.
Now, one thing the jury asked for was the gun. They wanted the .38 and they wanted to be able to test it. Should we read anything into that other than that both sides told the jury that they could do it, so they did it right away?
Well, I think it matters on who's on that jury. If we've got to remember what's the background of the people on the jury. The one thing that has been unequivocal in all of this is that gun experts have said that they don't believe that this can just go off, right? There's got to be something else going on there. Either is cocked back, right? Double action versus single action, or not. And so I think it's important when they're going to go play around with it. The thing that, of all the things that happened today that I thought was the most powerful that the defense did was with Bruce Harvey when he played the issue with the gun expert and the gun expert by mistake firing the gun.
Was that the prosecution gun expert?
Yes.
Is that the one you're talking? Oh, I'm just checking on that.
Right. So just to review for everyone, the big issue with the gun, single action, double action. If you look at me right now, to squeeze this trigger.
Do you mind if we just change that a little bit? Yeah, sorry.
This is a toy gun. It's not even loaded with cap. But for this to go, right now it's in double action mode, right? So I really have to squeeze hard. But if you slide the hammer back, watch how easily it can pull and fire. Here, it takes a lot more pressure, a lot more pounds of pull. Pull the hammer back, much easier. Same with the real gun, and that's the big issue. So one thing the prosecutor said in their opening, right now. What's that? Oh, there's Paul Howard, the DA. In the opening closing argument, she said that the hammer was not cocked and that it was somehow a fact, and I was a little confused there. She said it was definitely double action, and I didn't quite understand, because I don't remember any testimony definitively from any expert saying that it had to be a double action shot.
I didn't hear it, but then again, on closing argument, reasonable inference from the facts, though Clint went so far away from that, it was unreal.
But,
so that you
but
can
to me,
argue
it's such a big issue, whether it's single action, because there's no way you can accidentally shoot someone in double action. And prosecutors in their closing argument in the beginning said that it was, in fact, double action. So he had to do it on purpose. To me, I was like, well, where did that come from? Because then the rest of the arguments I heard from the defense is that no one could say definitively whether or not the hammer was slid back, whether or not the gun was cocked before it was fired.
Yeah, Bruce Harvey did make a big point about that, which is that none of the experts could truly say what mode it was in. You had to go based off of what each person was saying to try to kind of make an inference about it.
Yeah, so I think that's a tough fact to argue, but if you could prove it, it would, to me, if it was double action, it's murder. There's no way that was accidental, but I'm not convinced that it was double action at this point. Let's get some of these questions and comments from folks.
Trying to look through all my notes here.
Let's see. Give me a split-second decision. Carrie says, split-second decision. Lakeisha says, I think she was in disbelief. He shot her simply because it happened so quickly.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that, because I still go back to, and although the prosecution didn't spend as much time on it, she didn't want to see him at the hospital. Like, I thought that was a big deal. The fact that if you truly thought this was an accident, you've asked whether or not you're going to live or not, and then you are dying, and you don't want to see your husband to forgive him or tell him that it's okay. I know this was an accident. It's okay. And she didn't want to see him. I think that was a big deal. And then here's the thing that Clint Walker did go over that I thought was good, because I think that Bruce Harvey and I think Don Samuel kind of glossed over, had to get paid out of the estate and everything. It's like $1,600 to pay for the ashes for Diane.
In the will. In her will, it said.
But it has nothing to do with a will.
It has everything to do with it.
When you talk about how much you care for somebody, You know what I mean?
Latonia,
Like if
she
somebody's
was
called,
dead. Those are ashes. She's no
right,
longer Diane.
the
These
same ashes that he has now back in the closet somewhere.
We don't know where those ashes
no,
are.
I mean, that was what was argued today by Clint, and I just thought that.
Well, Clint can argue anything.
I know, but that's what, once again, that shows just like a callous disregard for her.
But it doesn't make him a murderer. Look, what do I think the DA's office proved? The DA's office proved he's a jerk, he's a racist, and all those other things.
But you know what? I don't think they proved he's a racist. They proved that he used race as a justification for needing the gun.
Let me ask you a question here. If this jury hates Tex McIver, can they still find him not guilty?
It's going to be tough. I've said the whole time he needs to be vulnerable and likable. And he has not looked likable or vulnerable. If they do their job, they will find him not guilty. Or don't be surprised if there's a compromise on an involuntary manslaughter.
See, one thing the defense was arguing today, they basically conceded that he was a villain, that the prosecution did a great job of villainizing him.
Absolutely.
So through that argument, does that open the door that the jury can all agree that they don't like him, that he's a bit of a jerk, but we're going to send him home anyway, even though he shot and killed his wife?
But here's what I think the jury's going to sit there and wonder about, and I still think those jailhouse interviews that he did are going to come back sort of to bite the defense. Because you know who you could have heard from to tell the story better than anybody else about what happened? Tex McIver. And he gave you're willing to be in the jailhouse and give an interview, but when you have the opportunity, if you are truly innocent and didn't do anything wrong, you wouldn't testify.
No.
There's a little bit of Clint Rucker.
No, I mean, I understand why he didn't.
You can't testify because they would have torn him apart.
But I think the jury,
Let me ask you this. Why would they have torn him apart? Because he's factually guilty, or just because he's a terrible person?
He's a terrible person who doesn't recognize the truth when it hits him in the face. And so he was scared to death, as many of us would be. And being a lawyer means he's academically smart, but he's not necessarily street smart. So he said what he thought he needed to say to make sure everybody thought it was an accident, when in fact what he was doing was digging a hole and putting himself in.
Street smart, it's more like easy street smart. He sort of is smart.
But was he scared? Because the one moment from everything that happened at the hospital, the moment that sticks in my mind is when the doctor's coming out to tell him about Diane. The doctors who were trying to save his life. And they said, her life. We're trying to save her life. And the doctor says, have a seat. And he says, don't tell me to sit, boy. To the doctor who's trying to save his wife's life. That doesn't sound like someone who's scared. It sounds like someone who's really arrogant, someone who
It sounds like a cowboy, doesn't it, sort of?
Yeah.
That's what it kind of sounds like.
Sounds to me like the perfect type of thing that Tex McIver would do. That is in character. He's a jerk. He said the wrong thing, he did the wrong thing, but that doesn't make him a murderer. Absolutely. Arrogant, condescending, don't tell me what to do. But you can't get inside of his mind either to know what he's thinking. Is he thinking, thank God I did it? Oh my God, I can't believe I did it.
I know.
We don't know.
This is the point that I go back to. I understand, without a doubt, as an attorney, as a former defense attorney, why you wouldn't put him on the stand. But I do think the jurors are going to think in their head, you talked about this with everybody in the world. Why would you not with us? You could have told your story here. You could have told us what was going on in your mind and what was going on in your head. You could have been on the stand and told us how much you loved your wife.
So I guess the question is, how much do we trust jurors to follow the judge's instructions and not consider all of that? Do you trust jurors to do that?
Never. Not one time did I trust a jury to follow the law. And I didn't expect them to follow the law. I hope they would oftentimes, but I would go for the emotion. I would try to, when I was a prosecutor, I would try to villainize the defendant. As a defense lawyer, I try to make the defendant a little cherub, a lamb, and de-villainize him or her, always.
Joe has a great comment here. I just can't get over the fact that he said he was sleeping after you're supposed to be so scared and all the adrenaline running. There's no way you would be able to lay down and go back to sleep. Do you think he was sleeping and the gun went off and woke him up?
I think that he had been drinking, as the testimony shows, the evidence shows, and that when you've been drinking and you're tired, they've been out all day, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he was dozing. To me, there's a difference in REM sleep, waking up, all sorts of different
Sleep
types of
expert
sleep.
stuff.
Was he or was he not aware? Because in his interview, when he is interrogated, he's sitting at the table like this, and he says, "I was handling the gun, and it went off." Now, if at that moment he can remember handling the gun and it went off, how in the world can he be sleeping? Why are we talking about sleep? Why do we have sleep experts? Why is sleeping even an issue here if he tells APD, "I was handling the gun and it went off"?
Bruce Harvey. Sorry, Bruce Harvey.
Paul Harvey, did they?
Stop.
And now you know
Stop.
the rest of the story.
Stop. Bruce Harvey made a very good point about that today, about the sleep part. He said that Danny Jo said that he was sleeping. That part of her testimony said that he was sleeping. So that brought that back in about the fact that he was possibly asleep. But the part that
She has eyes in the back of her head. I hope she's watching the traffic ahead.
I like to think that she's more of like an ear witness because she truly didn't see anything.
Yeah, I like
and so
ear
what
witness. That's a kind of
I mean,
cool
that's
thing.
kind of what she was. She was an ear witness. It's like an accident. You heard something happen. You know something happened, but you don't know the exact details of what happened. But the part that I have a hard time with, and I think that the prosecution made a good point about common sense. What on earth are you doing? Did you get the gun and then you just pull the trigger back and I'm just going to be waiting here ready? If somebody comes, I'm just going to be waiting here ready to shoot them? Like, how do you have to be able to explain that his finger's on this trigger. It didn't just go off. He had to do something.
Of course. But that's
He either did double action and squeezed really hard for that gun to go off, or he slid the hammer back.
Right.
But either one, he's got to do that.
But it's not mutually exclusive with him having his finger on the trigger. We know that his finger was on the trigger, or else it would not have gone off. But it's not mutually exclusive with him sleeping, dozing, coming in and out.
That's why I say part two is sliding the hammer back.
Doesn't surprise me. He said he was from.
So he slid the hammer back.
See, that's the part that
And had his
doesn't make
finger on the trigger
sense.
and left it on his lap.
And then he
pointed
fell
this
asleep.
way?
And then he fell asleep.
Makes perfect sense.
And then
Okay.
and then he,
Makes perfect sense.
And does that make him perfectly guilty of involuntary manslaughter?
Absolutely.
oh, I definitely think with that.
Okay.
I do believe that the prosecution had to put in that lesser included.
Oh,
I think
no
they
doubt.
had to.
No doubt. And I mean, some people could argue that that's what it should have been from the beginning, based upon what the evidence, what the easily provable evidence is. Like, when I look at a case as a prosecutor, I look at it two ways. I look at, what can I absolutely easily prove? Like, I may believe that a murder was committed, but do I believe I have the evidence to prove that?
Right.
Versus, I know I have the evidence to prove this.
As a prosecutor, you have a much higher standard of care. You have a much higher standard than a defense lawyer. My view, when I was a prosecutor, I would never go to trial if I thought the person might be innocent. Not guilty, but might be innocent.
Innocent,
Because
not
I was
guilty, different
Yes,
though, right?
it's totally
Absolutely.
different.
So if you believe that he's a murderer, but you're not sure if you have enough evidence to
Right.
prove it, is it ethical to still try him for murder?
Oh, it's very ethical.
Okay.
But on the other, because you hope that the jury will find him guilty of voluntary manslaughter, which is 1 to 20. And it's just not life imprisonment that will put him there for the rest of his life, for sure.
Just want to take a quick moment, because there's a whole bunch of charges here, right? We've got the felony murder and the aggravated assault. Is there any way for him to be found guilty of aggravated assault and the felony murder, but not guilty on the malice murder, based on these facts?
It almost doesn't matter if he's found guilty on the felony murder or the malice murder.
I know it's the
they carry his
same,
life.
but is there a way? Is there a way for this jury to look at the facts?
I guess they could try to split the baby on some levels and do that and say that maybe the intent, and even though you don't have to really, it
there's
didn't
an
rise
intent
to
to
the
assault.
right, but then it didn't rise to the level of like malice murder, of like more of a preparation in a sense or something.
Going to maim her and not
Yes.
kill her? Yes. See, I
You
don't
just
see,
wanted to
I don't see a
hurt her.
difference there.
You wanted to hurt her,
I
but
don't
not
either.
necessarily,
I
care
never
or whatever.
understood it when the law changed.
Now,
'cause
how about
I wanted to
possession of
say-
a firearm during the commission of a felony? That's like an automatic 5 years, on top of the underlying
And the felony being
or
ag
or
assault.
concurrent.
Okay, I thought,
Does not have to be consecutive. It can be
okay,
concurrent.
if he's found guilty
Yep.
of, and this is a Georgia law thing, if he's found guilty of the involuntary manslaughter, do those 5 years then attach?
The judge can do, if he's found guilty of having the weapon as well.
Yeah.
The judge can make it concurrent, can make it consecutive. The judge can give him.
But it's 5 years.
It's 5 years, but if it's 5 years
5 years for
probation.
Tex McIver, 5 years,
But it can be probation. Doesn't have to be incarceration.
it doesn't have, okay.
Yeah,
So
it's
full
not
discretion
mandatory.
for the judge.
It's not mandatory incarceration.
Wow. Okay, so a lot of discretion for the judge if there are any convictions.
What I'd
here.
like to talk about, Vinny, can we talk about this? The people in the courtroom.
Well, that was going to be my last question. It's going to be. All right, so I'll do the last question now.
I'm
Thanks
sorry.
For the prompt.
I've been waiting on this.
So you two are in the courtroom. What didn't the cameras show us? What did you see that we did not see?
It got packed. And what was very interesting to me, I have never seen such a case in following these cases where you have people who've testified and they still come back in to watch the trial.
Were any of them interacting with each other?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was sitting behind the personal assistant, and I saw the personal assistant
Terry.
go over to Annie Anderson, the masseuse, and give her a big hug.
So wait. Let's back this up for a second. So Diane's personal assistant, who was very emotional on the stand early on in the case, wanted to finish her life, was what he testified to, and became very emotional on the stand, very close to Diane, exchanged a hug with the masseuse.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about what the real relationship is here?
It tells me that there's no malice here, that they don't believe that Tex intentionally killed his wife. That's what it tells me.
But there's some people in that courtroom, I wasn't quite sure of the names, but there's some people in that courtroom who definitely do not support Tex.
Absolutely, you're correct.
And they were friends of Diane's. I felt like the Corey family.
The Corey family. That's her family in the courtroom.
They were together on this, and they were very intent the whole entire time. It's just been very interesting seeing all that. And then Annie Schwall, I can't remember her name. Schwall. Is it Annie Schwall?
Austin's mom.
Yeah, Austin's mom came in. And so that was interesting. Just like this whole, all of the witnesses are just sitting there.
What does it show me? It tells me that everyone who testified, everyone who's part of this case, has a vested interest. And he or she has very strong feelings about what happened and how it happened and why it happened. And they want to watch what's going on to the end. They don't want to be spoon-fed a verdict, regardless of what the verdict
All right. What's that?
No, good.
Are you good? Okay. And people are still talking about this, because I like to talk about what folks are talking about online. People are still talking about Danny Jo. And we're still getting comments today that people are saying she was in on it. Was there anything, let's go with what's not on the witness stand, but what you saw in the courtroom. Did you see anything from Danny Jo in the courtroom that would indicate that she seems to be supporting Tex McIver in any of this?
I didn't. I mean, today she looked different a bit. I mean, her hair was down, if we're going to look, if that means anything. She just had a different look.
Because Tex McIver is free to walk wherever he wants to, right?
Right, but she's never sat. This is the part that I did notice. I've never